You all, and thank you, Andrew. Thank you, the Ludington Library and the entire system. And hello to some friends I see out there, Jean and Cindy Kuhn, my sister Julie Deaver, and that's a young adult author. Jean's an author. Julie's a famous young adult author, and that is, if you can see the pictures, I don't know if we're sharing everything now, but that is a 29-pound Maine Coon cat you were looking at right there. Now, I have been writing full-time now for 30 years. I've written 40 some odd novels, 80 short stories, many poems, a nonfiction law book, an album of country western songs, a radio play or two, a nonfiction law book, which I might just have mentioned. But there's one thing I've never tried in this whole business of writing: plagiarism. By that, I mean this. I'm being a little facetious now, but there's a little core of truth in it. I've been working on a book about writing for quite some time now. And the approach I take is to use other people's quotations, other authors' quotations about writing as a springboard to explain how I approach the same topic. The themes will be arranged in relatively chronological order, so that we'll look at why do we write, how do we get our ideas, do we structure the book or not, go through the very beginning all the way through to the end. These are authors who are far more articulate and intelligent than I am. That's why I'm stealing their quotations, but with attribution, of course. First, however, I have to give you a caveat or two. And these hesitations or these concerns I'll share with you in the form of quotations, like everything else we're going to listen to tonight. And this was a quotation from the wonderful New Yorker roundtable writer Lillian Hellman. And she said this: "If I had to give young writers any advice about writing, I would say, never listen to writers giving you advice about writing." From the great British writer Somerset Maugham, he said, "There are 3 simple rules for writing a great novel. Sadly, no one knows what they are." Well, with all respect to those wonderful writers, I am going to disagree a bit. I believe that given a desire to write, a willingness not to shy from the sweat labor involved, and a fair command of your chosen language, you can learn the skills to be a successful and published author. But I do want to say that nothing is more subjective than writing. What works for you works, and it may not work for me, it may not work for anybody else. So I want you to listen to what I'm going to say tonight with this one grain of salt. Imagine that I am not giving you advice and telling you how to write. I am giving myself advice. This is Jeff, maybe an older Jeff talking to a younger Jeff, saying, these are the things that have worked for me. And if you get a little tidbit out of them, if you are a writer or an aspiring writer, that will be all to the good. But I know you are all interested in books because you're here watching me tonight and not watching Desperate Housewives of Philadelphia, if that was in fact a show. So what I'm saying now is that you may learn a little bit about how we put together these miraculous little rectangular things called books. And so we begin. The first chapter in my tome is Why Write? William Safire said this: "I write because I enjoy expressing myself, and writing forces me to think a lot more coherently than when I'm shooting my mouth off in a bar." Reynolds Price: "I write because it's basically the only thing I'm really good at." Jonathan Safran Foer: "Why do I write? It's not because I want people to think I'm smart or even that I'm a good writer. I write because I want to end my loneliness. Books make people less alone. That, before and after everything else, is what books do. They show us that conversation is possible across distance." James Thurber: "I write because it's so much fun." Well, that brings us to the question. As I mentioned, these are springboards that kind of lead into me, so to speak, about how I approach things. Why do I write? I write because I was a nerd growing up, but I was a nerd when the word meant something. You know, nowadays, if you're a nerd, you're a billionaire with some kind of social networking app you've invented that shows cute cat videos. No, I was a nerd back in the good old days. I was pudgy, clumsy, socially inept. I had no talent for sports whatsoever. I was uniformly ignored by the cheerleaders and pom-pom girls. And the coaches on the two teams plotted like grand masters to make sure I ended up on the other guy's team. Oh, well, this was understandable because I was a terrible athlete. I'd stand in the outfield of the baseball pitch. I'd ignore the game completely. I'd stare at the sky and I'd compose short stories and little poems that went something like this. The score is tied, 3 boys on base. I see the batter's happy face as he grips that bat and looks my way. All I can do is hope and pray that he doesn't hit that ball to me. But we all know how it goes. He whacks that ball and it breaks my nose. Well, none of this mattered though. My nerdness, my inability to attract the attention of cheerleaders and pom-pom girls, my absolute lack of talent in sports, because I had something better. I had the Glen Ellen, Illinois Public Library, where I spent afternoons and I spent weekends, and I learned there that I knew books were better than sports. They were better than almost anything. Well, cheerleaders and pom-pom girls accepted much of the time. Books could take us away from our daily cares. They could teach us in those pre-internet days about places and people and phenomenon that we had no exposure to otherwise. And one thing about books I learned early on was very important. And I guess I'll describe this with an example. You probably were at some point the new kid on the schoolyard. You just moved to town. Or maybe it was your school and you saw somebody who just moved to town and they were, as children are, excruciatingly shy and they couldn't say a word to a soul. But you'd notice that they had under their arm a book, and it may have been Laura Ingalls Wilder, it may have been Edgar Rice Burroughs, it may have been The Hobbit by Tolkien. And what you'd do is you'd walk up to that kid and say, hey, pretty good book, huh? You get to the part about the dragon and their eyes lit up and your eyes lit up. And even though you didn't know that person from Adam or Eve, yes, you did. Why? Because books brought you together. And I knew when I witnessed that phenomenon that I wanted to be a writer. Well, let's look at chapter 2 now, finding a subject to write about. Remember, we're kind of going chronologically through the construction of a book. Francine Matthews said, I always heard write about what you know. I disagree. Write about what you love. You can always research the rest. Stephen King said this, writers remember everything, especially the hurts. Strip a writer to the buff, point to the scars, and he'll tell you the story of each small one. From the big ones, you get novels. A little talent is a nice thing to have if you want to be a writer, but the only real requirement is the ability to remember the story of each and every scar. Meg Cabot said, write the kind of story you'd like to read. People will give you all sorts of advice about writing, but if you're not writing something you like, no one else will like it either. Flannery O'Connor, any writer who has survived childhood has enough information and material about life to last them as a writer for the rest of his days. Me, what do I write about? Well, I make a living as a novelist, so I can't wait for the muse. I think about what Jack London said, you can't wait for inspiration. You have to go after it with a club. I look for ideas that will be what I call mint flavored toothpaste. What on earth do I mean by that? Very briefly, let's say I was a product designer for Procter & Gamble. I go to my boss and I say, hey, Fred, I've got this idea for a great product. I just had dinner with my girlfriend last night and we had pate. Have you ever had pate? And Fred doesn't have a lot of patience for me, but he says, pate, yeah, I know. It's overpriced liverwurst. And I say, well, it was really tasty. So I've got an idea, toothpaste that's liver flavored. And Fred looks me over and says, why? I said, well, it'll put us on the map. We'll get press. The consumers will flock to it. And Fred then says, well, Jeff, I have 2 questions for you. One is this a product for dogs and cats? Because that actually is not a bad idea. And I say, no, it's for people. And Fred asks his second question, which is, Jeff, do you have your resume in order? Why? Because you're fired. And with good cause, because people don't want liver flavored toothpaste. They want mint flavored toothpaste or cinnamon flavored toothpaste. My point being, we writers owe readers everything. And it is our obligation not to write for ourselves because we think it's cool or neat. We have a clever idea. We write for them. We write for the reader so that when they come to the end of my book, they smile. I have happy endings in my books. There's loss along the way. There's a little violence and bloodshed, but basically they're happy ending stories. That's maybe a tear of poignancy, maybe a chill of excitement when the Lincoln Rhyme solves the case, or Colter Shaw draws down on the bad guy and stops him. But that's what people want to. That's what people want to read. So I keep in the back of my mind, it's not about me, Jeff. It's all about the readers. I keep in mind too, Mickey Spillane's comment that I just love this. People don't read books to get to the middle. Well, think about it. You don't pick up a 400-page book thinking, I cannot wait to get to the last page of page 200 and stop right there. No, the last page of the book is page 400. But if you're bored, well, that's a sin. We absolutely cannot do that. Well, how do I get people to keep going? I raise conflicts, questions, every chapter, if not every couple pages. The books move very quickly. They take place over a couple days. There are lots of twists and turns and reversals. I have a surprise ending. And if you've read my book, after that, there's a surprise ending. And following that, there's a surprise ending, because books should be about surprise endings. Even literature should be about surprise endings. The unexpected is what rearranges our perceptions and gets our palms sweating, whether we're intellectually stimulated or viscerally stimulated. So that's what I write about. I come up with ideas that will fit that formula. I don't write character-driven books. I don't write what I would call lit crime fiction. I write roller coasters. Okay, so that's chapter 2. What do we write about? Something that will get us to finish the book as quickly as possible. Chapter 3, planning the novel. Gustave Flaubert, books are not made the way babies are made. They're made like pyramids. There's some long pondered plan, and the great blocks of stone are set one atop the other. And it's backbreaking, sweaty, time-consuming work. Joyce Carol Oates said, the first sentence cannot be written until you know what the last sentence is. Well, what we're talking about now, and those of you who are authors know what I mean, outlining. The world of writing is divided into two categories, the plotters and the pantsers. Plotters being the outliners, pantsers as in those who go by the seat of the pants. And they're entirely different approaches. I, however, am an outliner. I am a compulsive outliner. It's what I'm comfortable with. Other authors aren't, and they write incredibly successful books. It's just, this is the way that I have learned I want to write, and I'm comfortable doing it. My latest book is The Final Twist. That's typical. It took me 8 months to outline it. The outline ended up being about 130 or 140 pages. That's a full-time job. I start with a little Post-it note stuck up on the wall. And if you live probably where you live, it's not as humid as where I live in North Carolina, but make sure you use little push pins to stick in those Post-it notes, because I came home from being out to lunch one day on a humid day and found my entire outline, the Post-it outline, on the floor in a jumble. And no, in answer to your question, I did not number them as I should have. Anyway, outline. And I cannot recommend it strongly enough. So I am being a bit of an advocate here if you are considering writing. There are two reasons for outlining. One is that, I was going to say crime novels, but I'm going to go so far as to say every novel is about structure as much as it is about finely crafted prose. In fact, I would rather read a well-structured book than one that is flowery and doesn't have much structure to it, that's amorphous. Who doesn't like a good turn of phrase? Well, that's wonderful, but a book has to say something. It has to grab us. And sometimes just page after page of flowery lyricism does not grab us the way a good story does. I look at Beethoven, my favorite romantic / classical era composer. He did not put two vivace movements right next to each other because he knew that the second one would be boring. It would lose its impact. He alternated andante, adagio, vivace, all the way to the crescendo, and then added a little coda on the end. The coda is like an epilogue in a book, a quiet reconciliation of the themes. Well, I don't know whether he was an outliner or not, but that kind of structure, it helps me when I outline to achieve that structure in a book. And a book should have that exact same kind of structure for emotional response. Well, that's one reason a book should be outlined beforehand. And there's another reason too. I don't need a show of hands. And some of you I can see, but you don't have to raise your hands for this. Have you ever read a book that should not have been written? Well, think about it. Of course you have. We all have. How does that happen? Well, one of the ways it happens is this. Let's say you, the author, come up with just a bang up set piece beginning. A set piece in a movie or book is a very exciting scene of conflict. It could be a gunfight, or it could be the opening to the movie Deadpool, if you ever saw that. That's one of the best set pieces ever done, not for the faint of heart or for children. But then there are also scenes that could be emotional set pieces. Emotional set pieces could be a conversation between two lovers, a parent and a child, something like that. Very, very intense. And I think these scenes are very important. But let's say you've got a set piece beginning, you put it on your computer, you start writing it without outlining it. Wow, out comes that first chapter. It has to be 2 hours, and it is a good chapter. It moves like lightning. Your palms are sweaty, your gut's all clenched because it's a great beginning. Well, you're not going to stop there. Bang, onto the second chapter, onto the third chapter. Things have slowed up a little bit now because you're kind of feeling your way along. Fourth chapter, you're on a page 150 now. Oh my God, sixth chapter. And you come to a complete stop, page 195. You have no clue where it's going to go from there. So you ponder it. You reread what you've done, and it's all good. Slows down a little bit toward the end of what you've done, but you're looking at the DM. What do I mean by DM? The dreaded middle. And you cannot figure out what to put in the dreaded middle to propel the story along. And then you're looking at the bad ending. By bad ending, I mean the ending where you've never met the villain, but suddenly he jumps on stage at the last minute. The Deus ex machina ending from Greek classic drama, where there was no solution to the hero and heroine's plight. So the stage managers reeled down a god in a chariot, a god in a machine, and picked up the hero and heroine and spirited them off to Olympus. Well, that doesn't work. Those are liver flavored solutions. You are now confronted with two choices. One, you can write that bad, dreaded middle full of cliches and the Deus ex machina ending and put it out in the stream of commerce. And I'm going to tell you what my take on that is. And you're going to get a pretty good idea of how I assess that. That is the morally cowardly, intellectually dishonest approach to take. The second alternative is the courageous, morally upright approach, and that is to throw out every single word you just wrote, pitch everything out, including that good first chapter. If you put it out in commerce, that's liver flavored toothpaste. We can't do that, and it hurts. It hurts us, and it hurts the readers. Throwing out everything, it hurts because you've written 200 pages of very good prose, but nonetheless, you have to do it because we can't give the readers liver. Now, imagine that you had that bang up idea, a great set piece, and you don't write it out. You put it on that Post-it note, stick it in the upper left-hand corner of your bulletin board, and then you start sticking other Post-it notes up. You don't write any of the book. You start outlining it, and you put a Post-it note up here and a Post-it note there. Somebody got killed here. The villain was a bank robber who became a bank robber because his father was a bank robber. You stick all this kind of stuff up, and you keep looking at it, and you keep thinking, well, I don't know what to put in the middle. I don't know what the ending's going to be. I should have a big twist for the end, but I don't have one. And after 10 days, 2 weeks maybe, you realize that this is not a book that should be written. Great set piece in the beginning, but that's not a book. Nothing else about it works. So what do? You wad up a half dozen Post-it notes, throw them away, and chalk it up to a wasted 10 days or so. And you go on to something else. See what an outline can do for you. I'm not really much of an advocate, but if I could advocate anything in our discussion here, I would advocate outlining, at least not doing what I do. That's insane. I mean, I'm crazy. I understand that. But what you do is you just come up with a page or two of where the story is going to go. And even in doing that, you'll be able to see, you don't know, this isn't going to be a book, or you'll be able to see, yes, it is. And I know what I'm going to put in there now. And you start filling in a little bit. And next thing you know, you've got a good solid outline and you can write your book from there. Okay, we're moving along now, chapter 4. I don't want to belabor it too much, but I think we're doing well on time. Chapter 4, writing the novel itself. Nathaniel Hawthorne. So in other words, we've got our outline. Now we sit down and we have to write the prose. Well, how do we do that? Here's some rules to help us write the book itself. Nathaniel Hawthorne. A writer's words should dissolve into pure thought. We don't want the readers to focus on pyrotechnic style, as I was saying before. We want to know what the author means. It could be a beautiful paragraph. We look at it, we read it, and you think, wow, that is absolutely spectacular. It's pyrotechnic, but I have no clue what it means. No, simple is better. Move things along, move the story along. And our father said, Julian, my father, was a writer, he said, never use a 25-cent word when a nickel word will do. We have to allow for inflation now. So let's say never use a $10 word when a $1 word will do. Again, talking about writing, actually constructing the book now, and tricks on putting the prose together. Stephen King, any word you have to hunt for in a thesaurus is the wrong word. I've been citing some wise, sage, erudite literary philosophers here, and one of my favorites is, of course, Dr. Seuss, who said this: "It has often been said there's so much to be read, you can never cram all those words in your head. So the writer who breeds more words than he needs is making a chore for the reader who reads. That's why my belief is, the briefer the brief is, the greater the sigh of the reader's relief is. And that's why your books have such power and strength when you publish with short. Short is better than length." So true, less is always more. Stephen King again, the road to hell is paved with adverbs. Samuel Goldwyn, if you want to send a message, go to Western Union, meaning your book is not about preaching, getting up on a soapbox. Now, you should look at larger issues, but you create a conflict involving that larger issue. You don't have a character lecture on why big heartless corporations are bad. You show a big heartless corporation doing something bad to your characters and let the readers go from there. Mark Twain, a successful book is made not of what is in it, but what is left out of it. For myself, well, once I finish the outline, I can write quickly. I can do 120,000 words in about 2 months. I can write in any order. I can write the beginning at the beginning, the middle at the middle, or the end, whatever. I may not, wake up and it's a beautiful day out and I look at my outline and today I'm supposed to murder somebody viciously. And I may not want to do that. You want to know when I want to kill people viciously? I'm a writer, okay? What do we writers enjoy most in the world? Finding excuses not to write. And what is the number one thing that will distract us from writing? Yes, of course, the internet, specifically YouTube videos of baby goats in pajamas. I could watch those guys all day long. You should look at them too. They're great fun. Not now, of course. I don't know what you're looking at now. You could be YouTubing that right now, but after I'm finished, why don't you YouTube baby goats in pajamas? Well, okay, let's say I wake up and, oh my God, my cable's down. I can't see the baby goats in pajamas. I have to write. Oh no, how dreadful could that be? So I call up the cable company and say, I need help. I have to work. I can't get my baby goats. Can you get somebody out here? And they say, sure, we'll have somebody out there at 8 a.m. So being a writer, I'm not used to getting up at that hour, but I do because I need my YouTube videos. And so 8 o'clock comes and goes, 9 o'clock comes and goes, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4 o'clock. And finally the cable guy shows up
And he walks in and he looks at my cable box and says, I'm making this up. That's a KT2000 box. I can't work on that one. And I think, it's your cable company. Why can't you do that? Those are the days when I want to viciously murder somebody. And guess who the next victim is and what cable company he works for. Anyway, my point is, you can write in any order, and I do that. So then the book is done. But I do have to comment on this. It is very important to know your craft. A workman, he or she will use tools that are adapted for the task. Electricians use certain tools. Plumbers use certain tools. Our tools are words and grammar and punctuation and syntax. A syntax is word order, by the way. Star Wars Yoda, a butcher of syntax is. You have to know all of these, know these rules. Writing is all about clarity of communication. You don't have to adhere to them. You don't have to make your book conform 100% to the University of Chicago style guide. But the style guide exists for certain reasons. Marks of punctuation are important. Semicolons serve a certain purpose. You should know what a semicolon does. Most of you, I'm sure, do. But there are times to break the rules, but there are times when you can't break the rules. Commas, for instance, to me, there are times when you have to use them, and times when they're basically optional. I try to be very punctuation free, because the commas slow the reading down. Now, I do that intentionally in a kind of a meaningful relationship scene. I will use more commas because I don't want the story to move too quickly. I want people to think about what my characters are saying and doing. In a shoot 'em up scene, as few commas as I can possibly use, I can possibly put in, because that's when the story races forward. But of course, sometimes they're not optional. And I'll give you an example of that. And I have to tell you about it. Did you hear about the terrible crime? Someone walked into a restaurant, pulled out a gun, shot another patron, and fled. Well, the ace detective comes in, and he asks what happened, and the witnesses tell him, and the detective says, I know who did it. And the assistant, the young rookie, says, well, sir, we need to take forensics, do all that crime scene stuff like you see on TV. And he says, no, we don't know. We don't need to do that. I know who did it. A panda did it. And the assistant says, a panda? He said, yeah, that's right. Last night I saw a special, and it said, a panda eats, shoots, and leaves. I'm glad you're all muted now, because the groaning, the collective groaning would be more than I think I could take. But you see the importance of a comma there. It changed the whole meaning of the sentence. Anyway, you know your craft. I tell myself to know my craft. There's some great books. One is Strunk & White's Elements of Style. Then there's a great book called Woe Is I. I love that. And yes, there is a book about grammar, very readable, very much fun, called Eats, Shoots, and Leaves. Okay, now we're getting to chapter 5. This is editing and revising. And Ernest Hemingway said this: there are no great writers, there are only great rewriters. Elmore Leonard: if it sounds like writing, I rewrite it. For myself, I rewrite many, many times, because I write the book very quickly. Remember that 100 and some odd thousand pages came out in 2.5 months? Well, that means the book is two things. One, it's too long, because it's easier to write longer than it is to write shorter. And it's sloppy. I just bang things out very quickly. So I rewrite 20 or 30 times on the computer, going through, and at the end, it's very refined. It's not complete rewrites that many times, but there's a lot of rewriting going on. And then I let it sit for a while, print it out, and read it on paper. And I edit 15 times on paper. Why? Because we perceive the written word differently on paper than we do on the computer screen. I don't know why that is, but it's more than anecdotal, because I have looked at the same paragraph on the screen 5 times, and I then look at it when it's been printed out on paper, and I see mistakes. I see typos, and then I see I maybe have used, it's inartful to use a rather unique word. Well, I can't say rather unique, to use a unique word in a paragraph like 2 times, like what is it, anti-disestablishmentarianism. You can only use that once in the whole book.
if you find it 3 times in the same paragraph, your mind wandered. You did something wrong. Reading it on the printed page makes a huge difference. And I'll say something else. I have now started to listen to my book after it's completely finished, or so I thought. I have a program called Natural Reader by companies called Natural Soft. And no, I'm not an influencer. I don't get a penny from them. And in fact, I think there's this free version. I pay, it's very cheap. It's like $10. But a voice will read your book back to it, and they do a very good job. I think Word, the Microsoft word processing program, does roughly the same thing. But it is amazing what you will see and hear. So I print the book out and read along word for word, and I will find more typos and find sentences that just don't fit together. So rewrite, rewrite, rewrite. Okay, chapter 6. All you writers out there, this one's near and dear to your heart: writer's block. And I'm not going to tell you this, wise, sage, erudite philosopher. You're going to have to figure it out on your own. It was a dark and stormy night. It was a dark and stormy night. Whew. Good writing is hard work. Yes, wise, sage, erudite Snoopy the Beagle said that. Terry Pratchett said this: "There's no such thing as writer's block. That word was invented by people in California who can't write." Douglas Adams: "I love deadlines. I like the whooshing noise they make when they go by." Larry Kahaner: "I don't believe in writer's block. Do doctors have doctor's block? Do plumbers have plumber's block? No, we all have days when we don't feel like working, but why do writers turn that into something so damn special by giving it a faintly romantic name?" Well, for me, agree with all of the above. There's no such thing as writer's block. There is, however, idea block, and you address idea block when you are doing the outline or considering the book, as I mentioned before. Remember, a good set piece does not necessarily mean a good book. If you're blocked, significantly blocked, your mind might be trying to tell you something. Now, I'm not talking about the day-to-day stuff, the difficulty we have. A surgeon wakes up in the morning, a neurosurgeon, and she just doesn't want to go repair that next aneurysm or whatever she's got on her schedule, but she does it because that's her job, and she does a damn good, fine job of it too. Well, we have the same thing. We have to write our book, and just because we may not feel like doing it does not excuse us. But that doesn't really address the fact that some ideas, again, should not be written. And if the block keeps coming back to get you, there could be a reason for it. So put that idea aside, maybe 10 years before you can get to it, or maybe never, but listen to it. Okay, chapter 7, this is always a fun one: critics and rejection. Sebastian Junger: "I wrote my first book in 7th grade, longhand in a green composition notebook. My teacher read it aloud to the entire class, chapter by chapter. No wonder I didn't have any friends." Neil Gaiman: "Remember, when somebody tells you something's wrong or doesn't work for you about their book, they're almost always right. When they tell you how to fix it, they're almost always wrong." David Mitchell: "If you show someone something you've written, what you're doing is giving them a sharpened stake lying down in your coffin and saying, 'Whenever you're ready.'" Me, I have had hundreds of rejections. Two of my favorites, I got back the self-addressed stamped envelope. I'm sure you're familiar with that. My manuscript came back to me. I expected a pithy, wise editorial letter explaining to me in 5 or 10 pages how my book could be improved. Do that, send it back, and we'll send you a contract for your next 10 books. I did not receive that. On the other hand, what I received was my own cover letter upside down with a footprint on the back. Then I got a letter that wasn't the actual letter that said, "Dear Mr. Deaver, thank you for your submission. This book is unpublishable. Thank you very much." I was ecstatic. Oh my goodness. First of all, I rubbed my hand on the back, and it was actually typewritten. Those are the days before printers. So somebody had gone to the trouble to type this, and it said such encouraging things like, "Dear Mr. Deaver, thank you, and sincerely yours." So I could only take that as a sign of encouragement, and I kept on writing. Well, those are rejections from the publishing companies. I had a rejection not long ago. I've written 80 short stories, as I think I mentioned. I think I have my chops down pretty well, but it was rejected, kindly rejected, gently rejected. I went on to do something else. And in all honesty, um, the same short story, Unchanged, I submitted to a publication in England, and it was submitted for Best Short Story of the Year by the Crime Writers Association, just to say that that rejection and criticism is extremely subjective. Um, my feeling is this, and I tell writers, I tell students in my class this: rejection is not a speed bump. Is a speed bump. It's not a brick wall. It should never stop you. You should just keep going. And there's not a writer on the face of the earth who hasn't been rejected. In fact, I was just doing a Zoom with some fellow writers, and we were talking about a well-known commercial author rejected many, many times. His vacation house has a bathroom that has been wallpapered with his rejection letters. Okay, chapter 8, lest you think this business is absolutely horrifying and depressing, there's humor too. And this is what I devote chapter 8 to: humorous interludes, famous rejection letters. I'm sorry, Mr. Kipling, but you just don't know how to use the English language. Your poems are quite as remarkable for defects as for beauties, and are devoid of true poetical qualities. That went to Emily Dickinson. It would be an extremely rotten taste, to say nothing of being horribly cruel, if we were to publish this book. That went to Ernest Hemingway. Please, it is impossible to sell animal stories in the United States. Animal Farm by George Orwell. This book will set publishing back 25 years, Norman Mailer. The author of this book is beyond psychiatric help, J.G. Ballard. You'd have a decent book there if you got rid of that Gatsby character, Mr. Fitzgerald. And my all-time favorite rejection letter. First, my dear sir, I must ask, does it have to be a whale? All right, we're closing in on the end now. We have chapter 9, the daily life of a writer. J.K. Rowling said this: be ruthless in protecting your writing days. That is, do not cave in to endless requests to have essential and long overdue meetings on those days. The funny thing is that although writing has been my actual job for several years now, I still seem to have to fight for time in which to do it. Some people do not seem to grasp that I still have to sit down in peace and write the books, apparently believing that they pop up like mushrooms without my connivance. I must therefore guard the time allotted to writing like a Hungarian horntail guards its firstborn egg. Henry David Thoreau. Write while the heat is in you. The writer who postpones the recording of his thoughts uses an iron which is cooled to burn a hole with. Well said, though. Thoreau had not recalled, apparently, that one should not end a sentence with a preposition, but we can forgive him, I think. Ray Bradbury, you must write every single day of your life. Lee Child, don't get it right, get it written. For me, it's simply a job. I work about 8 hours a day. I do a book a year. This year I've done 2 books and a number of short stories. Normally I'm on the road 2 to 3 months. That is coming back now. We are returning to a bit of normal. But in addition to that, one has to be active in the business. Physicians read the journals. Journalists read journals about the media. All professions do, trade journals and so forth. We have to know what's going on in the publishing world. Things have changed. Where are ebooks going? Will there be something new beyond ebooks? How are Audible books doing? Are they taking over part of the market? It's a full-time job. It requires our full-time attention. Why? Once again, because we cannot do liver-flavored toothpaste for our readers. Finally, chapter 10, I'll leave you with this, the joy of writing. And I could go on and on here because So many writers have written so many articulate words about the pleasure they get from writing. And Truman Capote said this, for instance, to me, the greatest pleasure of writing is not what it's about, but the music the words make. Ray Bradbury, I've never worked a day in my life. I've been a writer. Julie Meyerson, writing gives me such enormous pleasure, and I'm a much happier and therefore nicer person when I'm doing it. Writing feels like something I simply could not live without. It's a joyous thing. I feel very lucky to be paid to do it. But even if I'd never been published, I'd still be writing. I love being read, but the person I'm really writing for is me. Well, these are just a fraction of the thoughts that writers, all of whom I respect, have shared about their craft of telling stories. We can see how varied these authors are and the works they've created, how separated in time, geography, sensibility, and vision they are. But if we step back, we can see one thing they all have in common, and that is the passionate desire to reach the hearts and minds of readers and make them laugh or cry, or in my case, scream in terror, or better understand the mad world in which we live. And in doing so, make our time on this earth a little saner, a little richer, and a little more fun. And you can quote me on that last one.